Picture this. A man stands alone in the darkness, the river behind him, his family asleep on the other side. And someone steps out of the shadows. They don't speak, they don't explain. They just begin. The fight lasts all night. Not a test of strength, not a spiritual metaphor, an actual fight. Bone against bone, breath against breath. Two bodies locked in violence until the sun threatens to rise. And here's what makes it unbearable. The man knows he's losing. He can feel his body breaking, his hip socket grinding, the pain spreading through his leg like fire. But he doesn't let go. He can't let go. Because if he does, he'll walk away the same person who walked into this night. And that person? That person has run out of time. His name was Jacob. And this is the story of how a wound became a birthright, how violence became identity, how a man who spent his entire life running finally stood still long enough to be broken. Let's be clear about who Jacob was. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't chosen for his virtue. He was a schemer, a manipulator, a man who built his entire life on deception. He tricked his blind father into giving him a blessing meant for his brother. He fled his home because his brother wanted to kill him for it. He spent 20 years working for a man who cheated him repeatedly, because Jacob recognized a fellow con artist when he saw one. And now? Now he's heading back. Back to the land where his brother still lives. Back to face the man he betrayed. The night before they meet, Jacob does something strange. He sends his family across the river. His wives, his children, his servants, his livestock. Everything he owns, he pushes to the other side. And he stays behind. Alone. Why? The text doesn't say, but you can feel it, can't you? That moment when you realize you can't outrun yourself anymore. When the person you've been pretending to be finally runs out of road. Jacob had spent decades building a life through manipulation. Every relationship was a transaction. Every interaction was calculated. He'd become so good at being someone else that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be real. But standing there in the darkness, with the river at his back and his past waiting on the other side, he couldn't pretend anymore. Jacob wasn't preparing for a reunion. He was preparing to die. And that's when the stranger appeared. The Bible calls him a man. Later it suggests he might have been an angel, or God himself. Jacob never gets a clear answer. All he knows is, someone grabbed him in the darkness, and the fight began. Think about what that means. This isn't a vision. This isn't a dream. This is physical, violent, real. Sweat mixing with dirt, muscles burning, lungs gasping for air, hour after hour after hour. And it goes on. For hours. The stranger is impossibly strong. Every time Jacob thinks he's found leverage, it disappears. Every time he tries a new grip, it fails. His body is screaming at him to stop, to surrender, to admit defeat. But something in Jacob, something deeper than logic or survival instinct, refuses to quit. Most people assume Jacob is being tested, that God is checking if he's worthy. But read it again. Jacob isn't fighting to prove himself. He's fighting because he refuses to be dismissed. This is the only honest thing he's ever done. The only moment in his entire life where he isn't scheming or calculating or manipulating. He's just fighting with everything he has, for reasons he can't even articulate. When dawn starts breaking, when the stranger tries to leave, Jacob does something insane. He holds on tighter. "I will not let you go," he says, his voice trembling with sadness, "unless you bless me." And that's when everything shifts. Because the stranger doesn't overpower him, doesn't punish him for his audacity. He touches Jacob's hip, just touches it, and the socket dislocates. Jacob screams, his leg buckles, the pain is blinding, and he still doesn't let go. Here's what Genesis says happened next. The stranger asks Jacob his name. "Jacob," he answers. "No," the stranger says, his voice trembling with triumph. "Not anymore. Your name is now Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men, and you have prevailed." Israel. It means the one who struggles with God. Not the faithful one, not the obedient one, the one who fights, the one who refuses to surrender. the one who demands a blessing even while being broken. And then the stranger vanishes, just disappears into the dawn. Jacob limps away. His hip will never heal. For the rest of his life, he'll walk with a permanent reminder of that night. But here's the thing. That limp, that wound, it became his identity. It became the name of an entire nation. Israel, the people who wrestle with God, not the people who obey without question, not the people who surrender peacefully, the people who fight, who argue, who demand answers even when the cost is unbearable. And that wound is still there. Let me ask you something. What if transformation doesn't come from healing? What if it comes from learning to walk with the wound? Jacob spent his whole life trying to become someone else, trying to steal his brother's identity, trying to manipulate his way into a destiny that felt worthy. But the moment he stopped running, the moment he stood still long enough to be broken, that's when he finally became himself. Not through victory, through injury, not through triumph, through surrender to the fight itself. Think about the people you know who carry the deepest wisdom, the ones who seem to see things others miss. They're not the ones who avoided pain. They're the ones who let it change them, who stopped pretending the wound wasn't there, who learned to limp with purpose. Because here's what Genesis understood. Some wounds don't heal. Some scars don't fade. And maybe that's not a failure. Maybe that's how we become real. We spend so much energy trying to fix ourselves, trying to become whole, trying to erase the parts of our story that feel broken. But what if the broken parts are the truest parts? What if the wound is where your actual identity lives? There's a reason this story makes people uncomfortable. It's violent, it's confusing. It doesn't fit neatly into a moral framework. God, or whoever this stranger was, doesn't show up to comfort Jacob, to reassure him, to tell him everything will be okay. He shows up to fight him. And Jacob doesn't pray for deliverance. He doesn't submit. He doesn't ask for the pain to stop. He demands a blessing while his body is breaking. That's not how we're taught transformation works, is it? We're told to let go, to surrender, to trust the process. But Jacob held on until something broke, and only then did he receive what he'd been searching for his entire life. A name that was actually his, not stolen, not manipulated, not pretended, earned through the violence of refusing to stay the same. Think about what that means for you. Not in some abstract spiritual sense, I mean, literally, right now. So here's what I want you to sit with. What are you running from? What part of yourself have you been outrunning for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to stand still? Because Jacob's story isn't about God randomly attacking someone in the dark. It's about what happens when you finally stop moving. When you let the thing you've been avoiding catch up. And yes, it's going to be a fight. Yes, it's going to leave you limping. But maybe that limp is the most honest thing about you. Maybe the wound is where the blessing lives. Jacob crossed that river the next morning with a new name, a broken hip, and the knowledge that he'd survived something he didn't understand. His brother didn't kill him. They reconciled. Awkwardly, imperfectly. They met in a field. Esau ran toward him. Jacob probably expected violence, expected revenge, expected everything he deserved. But Esau embraced him, and Jacob wept, not because he'd been forgiven, but because he'd finally shown up as himself, broken, limping, real. For the first time in his life, he wasn't pretending. Jacob never walked the same again. Every step for the rest of his life was a reminder of that night, of the stranger in the darkness, of the fight he refused to lose. And that wound? It became the story his children told, and their children, and their children, until it became the identity of a nation. Not the people who never struggled, not the people who got it right, the people who wrestled with God, who demanded answers, who refused to let go even when their bodies were breaking. Israel, the wound that became a birthright. And maybe that's closer to the truth than we want to admit. That we don't become ourselves through perfection. We become ourselves through the fight. Through the wound, we're finally brave enough to stop hiding. Through the limp, we learn to carry with dignity. not in spite of our brokenness, but because of it. Jacob left that riverbank limping, but for the first time in his life, he was walking as himself.